Strangers and Aliens review of KRAVEN the Hunter with special guest Winston Crutchfield.
Well, hello. Hello. Thank you for having me on, Ben.
Hey, glad to have you, Winston. You asked for it, you
I
got
did.
it,
I
and
did.
unfortunately for you or me, I'm not sure which one, but you asked if you could be on the KRAVEN episode because you listened to the Madam Web episode and had just seen Madam Web and it
Yes.
didn't agree with me about Madam Web. So
We had different reactions to Madam Web.
yeah, we'll
Uh,
get to that. We will definitely need to get
eh,
to that. But before we do, this is Strangers
yes.
and Aliens. This is a podcast about pop culture and science fiction and fantasy, and some of the intersection, especially thematically, with spirituality and Christianity and faith. And Winston is someone who has been on podcasts with me before over on Up from the Ashes. That was you did a guest stint there where we talked about the Star Lost.
You were very patient with me. I appreciate it.
So for some reason, I only bring you on when we're going to talk about dead media, bad
Oh,
media. Um,
ouch.
yeah, it's an
It's a shame.
interesting theme that we're developing here. But this is only twice. You know, once is on
Right.
purpose, twice is a pattern. But
A
maybe for the third time when we
third
bring you
time
on,
makes it enemy action. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, you can talk about something that we'll talk about. Did you even enjoy KRAVEN? Because yeah, we'll get
Well,
there.
you
We'll
you
get
you
there.
started with dead media. Do you want to launch into that?
Yeah, we will in just a moment. But
Okay.
before we do, Winston, who are you?
Yeah. Oh,
Who is the
uh,
man that is Winston?
hi, I'm Winston, and I like to read good books, and I like to write good books, and I want people to write good books so that they can release them into the wild, and I can read more good books. And that's kind of what I am on about at the moment. I've got a few series that I'm publishing out there. And one they're both reprints at the moment. One of them is the Starman Saga, and that is inspired by 1960s science fiction. It's a modern sci-fi inspired by the 60s. And I met these guys after they were done writing it and had put it all to bed, and I convinced them to let me help bring it out into new editions. And that led directly to my sister's father-in-law. I asked him to read the books, and he goes, "Well, my mother used to write sci-fi, in the '60s." And I said, "No, I didn't know that." And so, with his help, I've been re-releasing her original fiction back into the world, and she was Diane Detzer,
Yeah.
which led to an interesting conversation with my brother-in-law. He's like, Who's this Diane Detzer? That's not my Grammy Di, is it?" I'm like, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say we should probably just at some point do an episode maybe about that kind of a thing.
Oh,
Because that was fun. I got to read two of those that you've been. I don't know if they're both out yet, or if because I read the Waterworld one.
the Sea People, sure.
Yeah, and then the Android one.
Conquest of Life.
Yeah. And then I also randomly picked up a nice looking sci-fi hardcover that was at Half Price Books on
Sure.
their classic I can't remember they call it vintage, their vintage section.
Vintage.
And I was like, this looks kind of interesting, and brought it home, and I was looking at it and I was like, this seems familiar though. And then I looked up the name of the author,
Right.
because one of the things I like to look for is books by authors that I haven't heard of. Like if I've
Right.
heard of the author, it's probably a pretty mainstream author, but I'm looking for more obscure authors because I'd like to discover some, And so I looked it up and realized this was actually one of her pen names that she had
Right.
used. And
Yep.
so I'm like, oh, I guess I'm reading a third book by
Right.
her now.
I
So,
guess so.
yeah. Yeah. So Winston likes good books,
I
and
do.
what's nice is, you are not just producing and publishing, but you're also promoting other people's work. And so you do a lot of things on Facebook where you're like, hey, we're going to live stream right now and talk about the book that I just read. And
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
I do a book talk live stream every Monday night at 7 p.m. Central on Facebook, where I talk about all kinds of stuff, including this random sci-fi book about ghosts of the future. You might have heard about this one, right?
Yeah. Although strictly speaking,
Yes.
the ghosts are metaphorical.
Oh,
So
well,
yeah.
spoilers.
Well, you know, I chose the title. I liked the title. I flirted with about 15 other titles and came back to that one. And I was just, it makes sense in
It does.
in that
It
metaphorical
works very well.
sense. So yeah. So yeah. But we're not here to talk about books. Not today. Today we're here to talk about movies, specifically KRAVEN the Hunter.
KRAVEN the Hunter. Yes.
KRAVEN the Hunter, part of Sony's Marvel's Spider-Man without Spider-Man movie series that was a huge build-up.
Huh?
A huge build-up to, and this is the climax. This is the end.
It wasn't intended to be. I mean, I love the original idea when they pitched it was build up. We're going to do these villains. We're going to do the Sinister Six, and everybody's on board. By that time, Spider-Man will have done his run at Marvel. And he can go back to Sony, or they could cast somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even been okay with that, but
or bring back. There was even talk about bringing back Andrew Garfield. Or something like that, because when Morbius was being promoted, there was a picture in the background that looked like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man costume.
Oh, I missed that.
Didn't make it to the movie, though.
Oh.
They either took it out or it was never put in the movie.
Sure.
It's just a poster in the background kind of a thing. So there was talk that, okay, well, maybe and then when they did the multiverse thing, it was like, well, maybe we'll just find out that this was Andrew Garfield's universe all along.
All along, yeah.
No, it wasn't.
No,
it wasn't. It is still part of the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, though.
Oh, isn't everything?
Well, that's the problem. Everything is. And the way we do it on Welcome to Level 7 is it's considered part of the multiverse when they officially put something on screen that ties you into it. And so Sony definitely is. But things like the Incredible Hulk TV series is not.
Okay.
Because they haven't had like a actual visual or verbal reference to the Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk series. Okay. It's only a matter of time, obviously. They'll be doing it. But,
So I'm guessing that it's your position that the Electric Company's Spider-Man is not canon to the MCU.
So here's the problem with that.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
You know something I don't.
Well, Into the Spider-Verse. Into the Spider-Verse ties into the MCU with some references.
Right.
And it also ties into like a billion different Spider-Man things. So strictly speaking, what I just said, what I just said, strictly speaking, means the Atari 2600 Spider-Man game cartridge is part of the MCU as part of that multiverse, because my favorite Easter egg from Into the Spider-Verse Part 2 was when you see Green Goblin. He's that two-dimensional pixelated Green Goblin from the Atari 2600 Parker Brothers video game. So
you know what? I'm on board. Let's do it.
Yeah. So doesn't mean we're covering it all.
But, okay. Well, yeah,
I mean, there's a lot going on there, but yeah. So they've just expanded it so broadly, and that's the one thing I was worried about when they started talking about multiverse, was just suddenly like, it's that whole if everything's special,
nothing is special.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it does mean that there's a possibility that we could still see some of these characters or the Sinister Six concept over at Marvel.
Yeah.
So there's still room to bring that in if fan reaction is strong enough, which I don't foresee happening.
Well, what I could see happening is in 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
They drop some references to these movies that for some people, hey, remember when we were kids and we saw those? Oh, man, I can't believe they're talking about that in our movie that we just watched. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. But for right now, before we even get into KRAVEN the Hunter,
sure,
they revealed not too long after Craven the Hunter made its premiere that the Sony universe is probably done.
Yeah, it was
Probably
official.
done.
Actually, wasn't it official the day before Craven released?
I can't remember the exact timing, but it was really
Because
close. Whatever it
yeah,
was, right
I had
before or right
understood that
after.
that was part of what killed the box office for it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that they did with
Shame.
this that I was surprised is that they released the first 8 minutes. And I felt like, okay, so they're releasing, I didn't watch it,
Uh-huh.
but I did time it to see, like, when I was sitting in the theater, okay, when did that scene stop? When was the
Uh-huh.
first 8 minutes done? I feel like they were doing that to say, hey, don't worry, the last two movies that we did, this isn't as bad as they were. And, and
Well, it's a completely different kind of film, isn't it?
well, completely. And that first 8 minutes is a strong 8 minutes.
It is.
It's not
It
bad
is.
at all. And that was them putting their best foot forward. And then, yeah, so they put their best foot forward and then they shot it by saying, but this is the last one we're ever going to
Yeah.
do. And so
No
this,
possibility of a sequel. Don't bother to get invested in this one. You know
yeah.
what? It'll be on Netflix in 6 months anyway.
And, they did something similar with New Mutants, with the X-Men universe, where they have the X-Men universe and was going, and then it's like, here's the next chapter and also the last chapter in our X-Men universe, which not anymore, though. I mean, with Deadpool,
Sure.
and now that's all MCU. It's all part of the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse.
Yeah.
And
that was Fox with New Mutants, though.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was not a strong way to end, but
well, we're not here to talk about the X films.
It's true.
So
it's true. We're here to talk about KRAVEN.
That's another conversation. That's another dead media conversation we could have.
Except it's not, because
Except it's tough.
Deadpool means it all belongs. It's all in there. It's
just... all shall be one.
Yeah.
Until no, wait a minute. That's Transformers when all are one.
Strictly speaking, the Sony stuff is still part of that multiverse as well.
Yeah.
And so it's technically not dead. I just don't know what they're going to do. Like Michael Keaton, they went out of their way to do a random feeling end credit sequence where Michael Keaton just ends up in the Sonyverse so they could work toward that Sinister Six. And so now they're going to have to figure out, do we want to devote any screen time to this? Are we going to try and bring Michael Keaton back? If we don't have to worry about it. Then the whole Venom thing as well. They sent Venom over and then they just bring him back. And it's just this very kind of almost silly side thing that if it hadn't happened, no one would care. No one would notice.
Right.
It wouldn't even be noticed.
Well,
so
I don't know. We could analyze this to death, but I think what it suffers the most from is the fact that they didn't have a showrunner. They didn't have a Kevin Feige saying this is our vision for everything.
I think that's part of it, but also part of it is just they're trying to make Spider-Man it's the Spider-Man without Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And so even with Madam Web, when they're obviously referencing Spider-Man, they never even said the name. They didn't.
Yeah.
They the whole running gag with Madam Web where it was like, well, what's the baby's name? Oh, it's I got interrupted by something.
Hey, let's guess the baby's name. That was a little okay. So since we're on this anyway, let's just start at the beginning and run up to KRAVEN.
Sure.
Shall we do that?
All right. So starting with Venom, is that
Venom.
what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess we can just hit all three Venom films.
Sure. I enjoyed all three quite a bit, actually.
Still haven't seen The Last Dance. I didn't make it out to the theater for that. But I did like number 1 and number 2 quite a lot.
So number 3, here's what I'll quick mini review with no spoilers. Number 3 feels like they actually have a cap on a trilogy.
Right.
It is a trilogy of movies that does, if you're looking at it in that way, it's a beginning, a middle, and end. They obviously do what they do with movies these days, where they leave a couple things open-ended. Potentially, we could come back and do another one somehow, some way. There's characters who are, what are they up to? And, well, maybe we'll find out someday. But I actually felt like this gave a nice cap to a character that I was really surprised got a trilogy, really, when it comes down to it. So,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
the reality is it's driven by the box office. So, I mean, I guess the first two did well enough to get that third.
yeah,
What
yeah.
what I appreciated the most about the Venom films was that they were self-contained and they could reference other pieces and other stuff, and they did fairly freely.
Yeah.
But they were self-contained. All the motivations were self-contained, and if at the end of that they had wanted to lift some of those characters or even that concept, because I mean now we have symbiotes everywhere, right? They could have lifted that out and made that into a bigger, broader film.
Yeah.
But it wasn't relying on that. I mean, I watched number one and I'm like, all right, it was great. I watched number two, I'm like, all right, it was great. I'd like to see, and number two, I thought led into a third film in the way that the first one really didn't.
Hmm.
Uh, but I was okay knowing that there was more, but I don't have to. If I don't get it, I'm still
Yeah.
okay with that too. Which is, I guess, that's not the best reaction, but
Well, but that's the way I like trilogies to go. I like, make that first one self-contained. Make it so that we enjoy it.
uh
And if you make it self-contained, then that's going to be something that launches us into the next one. The next one is where you can do your Empire Strikes Back. And
sure,
that's where you end with a cliffhanger. But generally speaking, if it was successful enough to get a sequel, it'll be successful enough to get that third
sure.
movie in the trilogy. And if nothing else for, well, I guess not anymore, but DVD sales, VHS sales. uh,
Well,
but that's your to me your great trilogies follow that pattern where
sure.
it's now the ones there are some great ones that don't.
Intro.
Indiana Jones would be one when it was a trilogy. It didn't matter; they were all three
Yeah.
self-contained. Lord of the Rings, obviously,
Uh-huh.
with the first movie, ended on one of the most heart-wrenching cliffhangers for me, both in the book, which wasn't necessarily the cliffhanger in the book, but where the fellowship is broken.
Uh-huh.
And I just hate that moment. I remember reading that when I was in junior high and getting that moment and just hating it because the team was broken, the family was
Team
broken, the
busted
fellowship
up.
was
It was
broken.
terrible.
And yeah, so the Venom trilogy works together as a trilogy. It's definitely trying to set up more, but it works together.
But it works together. So what did it do right that they kind of missed? I thought that they had Tom Hardy, was that his name?
Yeah.
The guy who played? Yeah. I thought his thing that he had going on between he and Venom, I thought that worked really, really well for the film. I liked the fact that they didn't try to force a romance into it. This is just
Yeah.
strictly a guy's action film. Let's get out there and do this stuff. I like the fact that all of his motivations were right out in the open. I'm doing this stuff not for justice or for whatever. I'm doing it because this this animal is driving me to do it, or I'm doing it because I'm just a loser and I can't handle things the right way. Until right at the end where, okay, I'm doing things for her,
Mm-hmm.
even though she's not my girl anymore.
Yeah.
And that was basically the way both the first two films handled Venom, and I thought it did it really well. It didn't try to. What I'm saying is, it didn't try to force me into accepting character motivations or character actions. It seemed very organic to what they were doing.
I would agree with that. And obviously, yeah, Tom brings a lot to it as far as acting for both sides.
So entertaining
He's
to
playing
watch.
both sides. He had a real good chemistry with himself. So, yeah. And, but the other thing I would say is the high concept works by itself, even though the big problem was Venom was birthed out of Spider-Man in the comics, and that was the whole question was, how is this going to work? Venom's whole look in the comics comes from he
Secret
started
Wars,
out as
yeah.
Spider-Man's costume.
Remember,
and so when
though,
he pops out of that, they made it work, though.
I know.
They made it work.
They did make it work, but they made it work by adapting some of the later Venom stories, basically after I was already out, so I'm not well versed in a lot of the modern lore. Anything after 2007, I'm not well versed in.
Yeah. Well,
but
they made it
that's
work,
okay.
and they made
They
a
made it work.
trilogy, and it happened.
And then we got Morbius,
Yeah, and so
which
the idea
again
was
we
we're
parted
gonna.
ways on, I think.
Yeah, well, Morbius, I appreciated what they were trying to do. I
Yeah.
appreciated the monster movie aspect of things. I appreciated
Oh.
the whole idea of the misunderstood monster who is struggling against his base impulse to, drain people of blood or whatever. And uh, and I just there was a lot of missteps with that movie, but I did not leave the theater angry. I left the theater feeling like, okay, I didn't need to spend the money to go to the theater on this one. I could have waited, except that I'm doing a Marvel podcast.
Right.
And so I didn't feel bad though. Like, oh man, I just wasted 2 hours and $7 of my time and my money and my life. I appreciated some of the things they did with it. There were some problems with it. Obviously, it was not a perfect movie. And in some points, it was also just like they were just doing the cliches. Like, we're just gonna, here's a cliche, make sure we hit that one. Okay, we got that one. But
it was, the writing on it was very formulaic, but with a lot of that stuff, those formulas are there because they work, because they give audiences what they're expecting. And when an audience gets what they expect to get, you get a positive reaction. The problem with Morbius, I think, is that it wasn't, I mean, it was a really terrible superhero film, but I thought it was a rather a good vampire film that had some missteps. And I think that, if it had just been vampires, if there was no Spider-Man baggage, I think the reception on it would have been quite a lot different. Still not fantastic. I mean, but all of the boxes I expect to see checked in a vampire film are there, which means this is a movie that I can put on and have a satisfying monster movie experience, which is what I
especially a
wanted from
monster
Morbius.
movie, but especially a monster movie where it's an anti-hero, where he's not a bad guy. He does bad things, but he tries to focus it so that he's doing these bad things to bad people instead of doing these, having innocent victims mostly. And so,
was he? I mean, because in Morbius, that really wasn't his focus at all. I mean, he wasn't trying to direct the monster or do something. I liked the way that Leto's Michael Morbius he just really didn't care about anybody. He just really didn't care about anybody else but himself and his friend. And we got that right from the very introduction of the character, when they're like, you told off the King of Switzerland and refused refused the Nobel Prize. He's like, yeah, screw him. Oh.
well, I'd have to rewatch.
It's not what I want to be known for.
I'd have to rewatch it, and I'd say my quick review of Morbius is it's not thumbs down. It's on the thumbs up side. If I'm doing a strict thumbs up or thumbs down, it's a thumb up.
Sure.
But I don't plan to rewatch it ever.
I've seen it 3 times now, and it's probably going to make a return appearance. I liked it. I found it satisfying.
If they were doing more, I might rewatch it, or if they're going to do some sort of Blade tie-in or something like that.
Oh, that would be very cool.
I would probably rewatch it, but for right now, no, I'm not.
No, and I don't criticize for that. It's not a film for everybody.
And then
there
was Madam Web. There was Madam Web, which, if you listen to my episode where I was doing the road trip,
You were
if
pretty
I
angry.
remember correctly, I just got more and more angry as I was driving home.
You did.
Yeah, I was pretty upset at that movie, and it wasn't because it didn't follow the comics, because I didn't really care about the character enough to care about the comics. It was just all of it's just misstep after misstep after misstep, and it's just dumb character moments and dumb character decisions, and I'm not going to get into it all over again.
Nope,
But if you
no
want,
need
you
for
can
that.
listen to my road trip episode. You can listen to the Welcome to Level 7 episode, and you can hear me complain about they put the pregnant woman in the back seat of a 2-door car. Like, what? How, this was a decision made by the director. Also, who plays a game called Guess the Name of the Baby? There are 8 billion names in this world. That doesn't make any sense. The only reason that was in there was so they could not say the name Peter.
Not say the name of the baby.
It was literally not so that we can say the name. We put it in here so that they're never going to guess the actual name. And boy,
baby.
won't that be funny when people are watching this very familiar scene that everyone plays at every... No.
Okay. So
I gotta stop myself. Though.
Stop. No. So let me not defend Madam Web for a minute. Because I find it hard to argue against any of your criticisms. There were a lot of things that should have been done differently. I will say this. It felt to me a lot like the old, I guess it's old now, but when they gave G.I. Joe to Stephen Summers. You know, and Stephen Summers hot off the Mummy, and they're like, hey, do us a G.I. Joe film. He's like, yeah, I'd love to do G.I. Joe. I live and breathe G.I. Joe. I've got a great scene for G.I. Joe running through and G.I. Joe takes the power armor and he blows up Paris and it's going to be great. You know, he turns to the assistant and says, what's G.I. Joe? Yeah, he had no history with it. He said, I had no idea what the franchise was. I had no idea what this media was, but I had this great scene in mind. Let's make the movie around that. And Madam Web, to me, felt like the same thing. The director says, okay, I have no idea who these characters are or what this setting is, but I have some great scenes in mind. Let's make the movie around that. Yeah. And so what we have was a halfway decent psycho thriller that was inordinately muddied by a whole bunch of references to things that just didn't need to be there. I did notice though that the filmmaking on it was, while you know, I heard what you're saying. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't paced for cinema. It was paced for movies because that's where the director came from, or paced for TV. That's where the director came from. This is the lady who did Jessica Jones and The Defenders and all these. And this movie is very much like those TV shows were, both in subject matter, in presentation, in pacing, in characterization of the leads. And if you enjoyed those films, or those Netflix series, then you're going to watch Madam Web and say, this wasn't terrible.
Unless you're me. And which
did you
I did.
enjoy Jessica
Oh, yes.
Jones? And
yes.
Did you really? Oh my gosh. Because I had the reaction to Jessica Jones and The Defenders that you had to Madam Web. I just kept getting angrier and angrier and angrier as I watched these things happen.
Well, maybe it was Stockholm Syndrome for me, where it's like I have to watch these episodes. I gotta find something to enjoy. This is 9 hours instead of an hour and a half. And the last thing is just you talk about them not knowing the characters or whatever, and that might be, but at the same time, they were referencing everything, just left and right. So many references
everywhere.
And the final one that just was the nail in the coffin, that was just like, that is so out of character for her, and actually mean-spirited almost, is she has this future vision. She can see into the future, and they come and they say, she says, well, how's Ben's nephew doing?
Oh yeah.
And they're like, oh, he's doing great. And oh, Ben loves being an uncle because he doesn't have any of the responsibility. And then she just smiles and basically looks at the camera and is like, that's what he thinks, or wait till he finds out. And it's like she's making a joke out of
the death of his sister and brother-in-law.
Yeah, exactly. And Well,
And
none of the
his own
responsibility
upcoming
yet.
death.
Wink,
Spoiler:
wink, nudge,
Uncle Ben
nudge.
dies in Spider-Man.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. There's the joke: nobody gets shot in Brooklyn or
Right.
something like that.
Like,
and, and he's so. Uh,
enough of that.
well, and the thing you can learn from it that I think you should learn from it is don't craft your story around the set pieces, because then you have to build your story like to get from point A to point B. The characters have to do these things.
Yes.
And if you're married to point B and it doesn't make sense for your characters to do those things, then it's going to make for a weak movie. It's going to make for a weak story. And so there's your writer's corner for the day. Yeah.
Yeah. Enough
All
of
right.
Madam Web. I don't intend to ever watch that again.
So let's get into Kraven the Hunter, which is R-rated and
Yes, it is.
earns that R rating. There is some very interesting violence going on here. There's red blood. I mean, I think it does.
I don't know. I think that if it were earning the R on violence alone, I'm not sure it would qualify.
But it had the language as well.
It had some very gratuitous language in there that felt to me like we need some hard F-bombs so that we can make sure we get that R rating.
So
it
felt like, and this is where we're going to talk non-spoilerly. We are going to not spoil the movie.
We're not going to spoil the movie.
Into it after I play the spoiler organ. But I would say two things I was reminded of watching this movie. One is 80s action movies.
Yes.
And the other is 80s and 90s superhero movies.
90s action films.
Maybe more your direct-to-video.
90s action films. Yeah. And we're going to circle back around to that. Before we get too far into it, I just want to know, do you have a history with KRAVEN the Hunter?
Ish.
Okay.
And I knew more about the lore than I thought I did when I stepped into the movie. Because I've read two storylines that are very much influencing what we see in the movie here.
Mm-hmm.
One was Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man, the adjectiveless Spider-Man, where it's Spider-Man versus Lizard, and there's some really cool stuff going on there as far as how he moves time. And how he you can see he's really breaking out as a creator. He had a lot more creative control over it, and so that is tied in because
the Torment storyline.
Yeah, and that is tied in, from what I understand, is because of the person who was behind the Lizard was actually a character in this movie, and it was a result of Kraven having been killed. And then, of course, there's Kraven's Last Hunt, which I've also read. And
oh my gosh,
liked very much. Yeah.
When where were you? That is one of those story arcs that is. Where were you when you read Kraven's Last Hunt?
I was in my house. So,
generally
speaking, that's where I read my comics. But actually,
for our
I did not read it when it came out.
Where were you when the Columbia shuttle went up?
Yeah.
Where were you?
I read it because it was at the library about 15 years ago. And so it was at the library. I was looking through the graphic novel section, and I was like, I haven't read this. I need to. Pulled it, checked it out, read it at my house. And so I had heard about it, but I had not read it. I had read other stories with Kraven, and then, of course, Kraven showed up in the Spider-Man cartoon series.
Yeah.
Coming after Spider-Man, so I had seen that. I was familiar with the character, but Kraven's Last Hunt, of course, was just a fantastic story arc.
Really was. I remember seeing that in the gas station. When comics used to be sold on spinner racks, right? And issue number 2 was the first one that I saw. And at that time, when The Hunt was published, it was published across the 3 Spider-Man titles. Web of Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spectacular, and Amazing. So you had to find all 3 in order to read the entire thing. And of course, gas stations and pharmacies, that's where I got comic books. And what did they have? You don't know. I didn't how it took me months to track down all of these issues, and I had to beg and borrow from my friends, but I had to know what happened. It was, I mean, Craven's Last Hunt was my first big comic book hunt, where I realized comic books are something to be taken seriously, to be read as a novel, and I gotta catch them all. I gotta read them.
Yeah.
But I met Craven, and I told you I had a prop. I met Craven because of my grandmother, who unashamedly, mistakenly put comic books in her grocery cart for me. Yes. When she bought me this.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, it's I don't know how far back I can get that so you can still
it's
see
in
that.
Yeah.
But that's the giant size reproduction of Amazing 100 with the first appearance of the Sinister Six, and that's where I met Kraven the Hunter.
Here is where I really wanted to go opening weekend and did not get a chance to go opening weekend. And part of it was like, I want to get this out of the way. I just want to see it. I also wanted to see Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, but that one I want to see with my son. And so it's kind of like, how's this going to work? And then I was doing Christmas shopping, and I also needed to bring home dinner, and I left very early. And I was like, I actually have time for me to see the movie before I need to pick up dinner and bring it home. And so I was able to go and see Kraven. I would have seen War of Rohirrim if I didn't want to see it with my son. So since it was Kraven, it was just me. And I went, theater was dead. There was no laughter in the theater, even when there was every once in a while something kind of funny. There was, I don't know, maybe 10 other people in the theater with me. But it was middle of the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. So, yeah.
I think there were 6 other
experience?
people in the theater with me.
Yeah. And that doesn't surprise me. I mean, that's the drop off was high between last weekend and this weekend, and no surprise, especially when you're considering the season we're in.
Yep.
The competition that it's up against, with Sonic 3 apparently being
Sonic 3.
I'm hearing nothing but amazing reviews of Sonic 3. And
well, I mean, this is not the time of year to release these kinds of beat 'em up movies. It's just not.
Yeah.
This is the season for Harry Potter and Sonic.
Yeah, and Lord of the Rings.
And Lord of the Rings, right.
Like December is Lord of the Rings season. And this is actually, I was telling my son, this is the first time that I haven't seen a Lord of the Rings movie on opening weekend.
Yeah.
It's just like in that initial release period. But I am still hoping to see it in the theater. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited about it. It looks really good, and I know people are complaining. I don't care. It looks good. So we'll see.
We'll see.
But anyway, yeah, so huge drop off, but I was not disappointed. When I walked out of the theater, I texted my Welcome to Level 7 crew, and I said, I've seen it, and I'm not angry.
I was very well pleased. I was listening to the soundtrack on the drive home.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. As soon as the credits started rolling on, I'm like, oh, yeah, this soundtrack's going on. Because I thought the music was really, really good. I didn't think it was outstanding. I'm hard pressed to and especially having just seen it, I'm hard pressed to tell you what the dramatic themes of the music are or what the leitmotifs were.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was watching it, I was really impressed at the way the music matched the cinematography.
I honestly barely noticed the music, which is a good thing. You don't want to notice the music because it's bad. If
true.
you notice the music because it's good, that can still take you out a little bit, but it's not a bad thing. Like if it carries you and it's just there as part of the experience, that's not a bad thing at all.
Right.
Because that you want it to fit well and it
did. I thought it fit really, really well.
So, you call the beat 'em up. That is exactly what this is.
It is,
That
isn't it?
is, I mean, and it's
Unapologetically.
yeah, in its most distilled form. This is about a guy called Craven the Hunter who goes out and hunts people, and and then he gets hunted,
He gets hunted.
and then he becomes the hunter again.
Yes.
And but there's also some character development. There's family dynamics. There are some twists and turns here and there. There's some twists that's like, I don't think that's quite the dramatic twist they thought it was going to be, especially when they reveal. Although I will say this, I was not expecting the main anti-antagonist, anti-protagonist. I don't know what you want to call the main bad guy because they're all bad guys, but the main guy who's an antagonist against Craven and not his dad, I was a little surprised to realize, oh, this is him. But then it's also one of those movies where it's all a small world.
Right.
Everyone has been in contact with everyone else ahead of time, and now it just so happens that they all have powers, or that they are, part of this initial conflict and that kind of thing. So, and there were a couple moments where I was like, that was dumb. I don't understand what's going on here,
things
but
like that. But
it is nothing
also
worse
very
than
fitting
your
to
90s
the
action
genre.
movie.
Because this is a gangster film.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
It's a gangster film with superpowers. I mean, but in a gangster film, everyone is connected. Everybody knows the guy, and everybody runs in the same circles. So it's really not surprising that they interact in the way that they interact. So, of course, because this is a gangster film with superpowers, it's not really that surprising when everybody has superpowers.
Yeah. And I'm not going to get into all the fine details here until we play the spoiler organ.
Sure.
But they bring in a lot of characters that I was not expecting. Like how many characters they actually brought in from the comics.
Right.
I mean, they were trying to set up the Sinister Six, then they could have almost done it with all the characters in this movie.
Just about. Let's see. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 6 in the film that spring immediately to mind. So
yeah, it's and so what would they have done with that? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No.
Who would the 6 have been?
What might have been, right?
It doesn't matter. It's not happening.
Not happening.
But
so
yeah.
Opening. Let's talk about the opening.
It's a big action sequence, and it is a James Bond opening in the sense that you get a mini movie in those 8 minutes. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed those 8 minutes. Might have been the best 8 minutes of the movie, but
I don't know about that, but it was. I mean, it was strong. The vibe I got from the beginning was Mission Impossible rather than James Bond, but I could definitely see it's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess the one thing that makes it not so much the James Bond, most James Bond openings don't really tie into the main plot of the movie. It's or if it does, it's because something at the end of that scene or that sequence kind of dovetails in, but it's not like but this absolutely was part of the plot of the movie. I mean, it was if you had taken that out and not had that, there would have been a little bit missing from.
So let's talk about some of the things they did right in that opening sequence. We got to meet Craven right off the bat. We were introduced immediately to his superpowers. Mm-hmm. I mean, with no explanation, none needed. This is a superhero film, right? Not surprising. The main guy has powers. Everything else will come. We know who he is. We know what he does. We know why he does it. And we get a sense of how he does it. And once you've got that foundation, the rest of the movie is just a ride. And I thought that setup, that mini setup, was just. I mean, without that foundation, the movie would have suffered, I think.
Well, and without spoiling too much, the very next scene after that first 8 minutes is 16 years earlier.
You're right. It's his origin
It's
story.
the origin story. And if they had started there,
Mhm.
it wouldn't have been as strong of an opening.
Yeah. It would have
Now-
been slow.
Yeah. And so you start with a bang, and then they step back a little bit and say, okay, now here's where we came from.
This is why you
And-
should care. Here's what we're doing. This is why you should care.
Yeah. And everyone is in that. And then we're going to meet them all,
Then we
16
meet
years
them all
later
again.
again. Yeah.
Almost
So-
everyone.
Well,
yeah, we'll circle back around to that.
so. All right. So all things considered.
Yeah.
What was your, how many big game trophies out of 5 would you give to KRAVEN the Hunter?
Oh gosh, boy, I really want to give this a 5 out of 5. I don't think it's quite strong enough. I don't think the ending landed it as in quite the perfect, satisfactory way to earn that concluding 5 trophies. But it's a solid 4 for me. I
That's fair.
really enjoyed this. It hit every action movie beat that I want to see in this kind of film, and it did it in a very satisfying way.
It's fair. I would not go that high. I would say, and that's, this is not a perfect movie. This is, I would go with 3. Like that's where I'm landing. It's mid-level. Again, if I'm doing a binary thumbs down or thumbs up, it's a thumbs up from me. It's definitely not for everyone.
It's not
at all. It is not for everyone.
I hope to talk you up here in just a minute.
So
I'm gonna squeeze that 4th star out of you.
I don't know. I can be stingy sometimes. So, but enjoyable as a superhero movie, and especially if you're coming in ready for a throwback action movie. Like this is a throwback action movie, and it has motivations. They're not all perfect, but they all work. And it has moments where you're like, it's a little bit of a leap. And again, kind of talking about like, well, you got to go from point A to point B. So how are we going to get there? Well, this character has to do something. We can kind of make it work. But you're forgiving of it, or at least I was forgiving of it, because it was giving me a story that I was kind of enjoying. And the action moments were kind of fun, and then they do something that's kind of disturbing. And
right.
And then, okay, and now we're back to fun a little bit more here. And okay, that was kind of dumb, but it was fun, dumb, So when I walked out, I was like, yeah, this is good. And I would say Aaron Taylor Johnson, he did a decent job. He fit the physicality of the character, and he fit the attitude of the character, and he worked. It worked.
And you know what? Once again, just like Venom, it didn't try to force on us anything that didn't seem organic to the characters. Yeah. And that's just an opinion. I kept thinking they're going to do, they got the romance. He's got the girl. Nope. Not even a thing. Not even a thing.
Not really, no.
And there really was no need for it or room for it in the film. Not that kind of movie.
Right. Room, especially, I think you're right. Like, now, if it had been a 90s action movie...
he'd have got the girl at the end just because that's what you do.
But not here. Okay, I'm going to play the spoiler organ. We're going to dive in a little bit, and then we're going to close down the conversation. But here we go. If you haven't seen the movie and you want to, go see it. If you haven't seen the movie and you're not sure about going... just keep listening. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we might spoil some of the things, but I don't think it's going to take away from your enjoyment of the movie if it's the kind of thing you would enjoy. So, spoiler button now.
Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers.
All right, you've been warned. The characters
Yes.
The character pool, I guess, that they were pulling
Oh
from.
my
I was
gosh.
really surprised. I was really surprised. We've got Rhino, which I think I expected because I think he was in the
He's in the
trailer.
trailer.
Um, I did not expect, and this is one of those things where it's like, his brother also a supervillain.
Yeah, as
That
soon as they
it was
introduced
kind
his
of
brother.
earned, but at the same, you're really pulling away from the comics now. But
Yeah.
when the way they introduced the whole idea of his brother being Chameleon,
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it until they said it. But the first couple times he does something where he's like, I'm going to talk like our dad, da, da, da,
Yeah.
da. And it sounds just like him. And it's like, oh, that's kind of funny. And it's a brother joke.
And the
And
first
then
time it was
he's,
funny. The
and
second
then
time, when
he's,
he gets up on stage and he's playing the piano, and he says, "Do Tony Bennett." He says,
yeah.
He can do anybody. I'm like, I put in my notes. I'm like, he's the chameleon.
Well, his dad says he's like a chameleon.
Oh, he
And
does.
he
Well, that's
does.
probably why I wrote that
Yeah.
specifically at that point. Then,
Yeah. It
but
was
yeah, they're
in
gonna.
that scene. He says something, he's like a chameleon.
Yeah,
And then I'm like, oh,
yeah, he's
interesting.
gonna be the chameleon. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then when you finally actually see him become the chameleon a year later, um, it looked kind of cool, kind of
It was
creepy,
weird, wasn't it?
and it worked.
Yeah.
It worked. So I liked it that when he changed to look like Craven,
Yeah.
he didn't change in height. He's still looking up at his brother. You should see the look on your face.
And boy, wasn't that weird and creepy and surreal and
Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably the one thing that makes me feel we're missing out. If we would have seen the Craven sequel, where
yeah,
it would have been Craven versus his brother,
yeah.
like that could have been good.
Give
I
his
will
brother
say
a
another
chance to
thing.
bulk up and do some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh well.
yep. Rhino, Chameleon, Calypso.
Calypso. I don't
She's
know
from.
Calypso.
Well, I didn't either until I looked her up. And I was like, oh, I have read comic books with her in it. The Spider-Man Torment had her in it. From what I
You're
heard.
right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see her with the in the dress that hangs down in the front and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's that whole. If I remember correctly, it's been a long time, but like there's the drum theme that's kind of going throughout the whole thing, where it's like thump 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 thump,
mm-hmm.
and feeding into that voodoo priestess kind of thing that she was. So yeah.
And I thought that
Um,
was the whole voodoo thing. I'm glad they didn't lean into that because I thought that I didn't think that was very organic to the film. It seemed
that
tacked
did
on.
feel, yeah, it felt shoved in, forced in, and what little bit they did when he got his powers, she gives him the serum,
Yeah,
and you hear the voiceover. It's like this is not great.
yeah.
This is not great. Is this what we're in for the rest of the movie? We weren't. We
No,
weren't.
no.
But
I mean, if they had just stuck to the animals, that the spirit of the animals, and I thought that was great when he gets his Tarzan on and his Mowgli on, and
yeah, yeah.
he's connecting with the animals through the power of the serum. I thought that was awesome, and all the rest of that just kind of felt, yeah, we got to do a little bit of this, so let's do it like that.
The one thing again, toward the beginning of that origin story was like, oh, what are we in for here? And that was the lion attacks him
Yeah,
and then picks him up and then carries him
yeah.
and then gives Calypso a look like, and you need to help him. And it's like, I'm a helpful lion, even though I just mauled him.
No,
Like,
no, 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 no. That's so this is intrinsic to African spirituality. The lion, and they were talking about this in the camp beforehand. The lion, the legend, is the spirit of the jungle. And the thing about the jungle is, and this goes back, you can find this in the literature even as far back as Rudyard Kipling. But I mean, Burroughs really brought this out. You don't choose the jungle chooses you. And when the lion brings him out and he drops him down, and you see he's bleeding, you watch the blood of the lion drip into Craven's wounds and start to heal them. at that moment.
I guess the question I have is, why did the lion maul him in the first place? Now, at first I wondered, were his wounds actually just bullet holes? Like, did his father actually mortally wound him and the lion was actually helping him? It wasn't. It
No,
wasn't. There was claw marks and scars and stuff. It
yeah,
wasn't.
it was.
But the wound that it falls into is a round hole. Like,
Mhm.
it was perfect. I understand what you're trying to say here, but it's just like, well, if the jungle chose him, why did the jungle first try to kill him? and then
Because power
and
doesn't come without suffering. Power
uh,
doesn't come without pain.
and he got the suffering part.
He got the
He did.
suffering. There is a
Yeah.
price for power, and that was his.
So,
You know, and as the Craven I remember followed that kind of pattern in the comics, and didn't get the super soldier serum until revisions later.
yeah.
But
Yeah, because he was just a guy. He was just a
yeah, he was just a
peak
guy.
human person, and his whole idea was, I'm going after the most dangerous game. And he was a human going after Spider-Man because Spider-Man was uh, the most dangerous game.
Right. But
So,
yeah, no, I thought that worked really, really well, when the lion comes on, and especially with his father immediately, I killed the lion for you.
that was a surprise to me, though.
I mean,
Like that.
that was, now Craven is the king of the jungle.
Yeah. Well, and then Craven, of course, at the end puts on, the.
Yeah, I
Okay.
thought that
All
was
right. I'm not sure what this
that
means.
entire ending sequence I thought was really, really forced.
And I would say that that part at the beginning, of course, you also have the character who's going to become Rhino.
Yeah.
He's a part of their safari or whatever, and then turns out everything is driven by Craven's dad.
Yeah.
If Craven's dad doesn't like you, you're gonna go and get superpowers to try and have him like you more. Like that's what Rhino did. It's kind of what his brother does.
He had become
Even though
strong,
dad
right?
was dead. Yeah.
Again, that's really in keeping with the gangster genre. Um,
Well,
so
and I
I was
hadn't thought
okay.
about the gangster thing because there is it's not nearly the heights that it could reach, but there's a Godfather-ish kind of vibe going on here
Yeah.
where you have like the father who's looking at his two sons and who's going to get my empire later on, and he doesn't want to give it to either of them because Craven's out being a good guy and his brother
And he
Dimitri
is unabashedly a good guy, which I kept wondering. I'm like, if this is meant to be a Sinister Six film, at some point they have to have Craven go bad, and they just didn't. I mean, they just didn't.
no.
There is no way for this Craven the Hunter to become the guy stalking Spider-Man. I just
No.
don't see that transition.
No. Well, but you also see it in Morbius, when Morbius and Vulture meet and they're like, I don't know what's going on, but it has something to do with Spider-Man. Let's do some good. It's like,
Wasn't that weird? That was weird.
What are you talking about? Well, the Sinister Six movie was going to be, I think, an anti-hero movie. And it was going to be like, we're bad guys.
And try to
some
do the
of us
Suicide Squad
we're coming
thing
together to do a good thing. And yeah, that's where I think they were going with it. We'll never find out, and who cares?
Yeah, doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed, and my very first note when I said, okay, I'm on board, this is not just going to be an action film, this is going to be a great film. At the end of the opening sequence, when Craven escapes the prison facility and he starts running off into the tundra, and there's this wall of ice, this ice storm just whoosh, and he's just running right into it. The cinematography from that point on and through the entire rest of the origin story are these broad, sweeping, powerful natural images. I mean, you've got lightning and thunder and the open plains of the African velds, and these powerful animals doing unstoppable things. Everything in here is just this huge, grandiose force of nature, and the music backs it up. I'm like, okay, this is awesome. This could be a Hemingway adaptation at this point. Now, they moved away from that and I was kind of sorry to see them do that. But I mean that first
But
entire opening sequence, God,
but they change the style when they go into the city.
they
Like
did.
you go into the city, it's much more compressed and condensed, and there's walls, and there's still broad, big, establishing shots, but it's the steel jungle kind of a thing where they're stuck, and even in the big car chase,
Yeah,
it's streets, and they're lined with buildings, and it's
concrete
just
jungle.
very
Yeah,
much smaller. And
I
yeah.
mean, but even when they returned to Africa and Siberia, we didn't get those. We didn't get that the broad power,
Mm,
those big money shots anymore. I missed that. And I wish
okay.
they'd have done more with that. But uh,
Most of the CGI animals were good,
yeah,
mostly. The
I didn't have
bear,
complaints, but
my one complaint was that bear when it comes running, and I'm just like, that looks terrible.
Bear was a
And it
little
didn't
jank.
look bad as far as animation goes. It just didn't look good. Like it's just like they made a really ugly bear.
Yeah,
It's moving like an ugly bear. It looks like, but just I was just like, that's a
yeah.
weird choice that they
Had
made
to be
there.
a bear though. Nikolai was the bear.
Hmm, it's true.
He was the
Yeah,
Russian bear.
yeah. And
Let's see, what else do we? Oh, we got a death and return sequence. I thought that was really good. I mean, he dies.
with yes, yeah, for
Right.
3 minutes.
3 minutes,
He
he
spent dead.
dies
Yeah,
and comes back. So that's the complete that's the complete mythological package right there, isn't it?
yeah.
Go into the underworld, come back. One with
Changed
nature,
and
chosen,
yeah,
assume the spirit mantle. Yeah,
yeah.
good,
And
good,
he has
good mythological framework going on.
well, and then also that whole the relationship thing with between the brothers.
Yep.
A good relationship that ends up coming apart at the end.
Yeah.
Um, to set up a sequel, but then also the sons versus the father, and just how he looms so large in every scene that he's in, especially with them.
Yeah.
And then both of them, you can see moments where they want to stand against him, and he's like, "What are you going to do? Come on!" And then they don't. They retreat
Mm-hmm.
until the end. Until the end.
Till the end, that was very cool. I thought I kept wondering how they were going to disintegrate the brothers' relationship. Because he's the protector, he's there too.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, when Dimitri has a chance to exercise some power, and KRAVEN literally walks up and takes Dimitri's power away from him. Like, oh man, that's like, okay, they're going everywhere.
Yeah.
He's going after Dad next, and yeah,
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I noticed with Dimitri, once they had said he is like chameleon, no, um, when the guys come in and start shooting the place up, he crawls under the piano and then like lifts himself up against the back of the piano or against the bottom of the grand
yeah,
piano, and he's wearing a suit. He's blending in. Like
yeah.
he is trying to blend in
And he's
so nobody
crying,
notices him
and
there. And he does things like that later on as well, where he's kind of trying to I'll be who you need me to be,
yeah.
and then also he tries to like hide and blend and um
I mean,
yeah.
good characterization, good foreshadowing. Just
No,
a weird choice to go that direction.
yeah. Well, and who knows what would have happened if they had done
Yeah, who
more
knows?
in the Sonyverse, but um
Who knows?
yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't have any complaints with any of the way that was done. I thought it worked well for what they did. I thought the choice to do it was kind of odd, but yeah.
what about Rhino? What did
Uh,
you think about Rhino?
what about Rhino? I get what the character wanted. I get that. And I was like, I found this professor, Miles Warren. I'm like, yeah, you did. We got the jackal
The
now.
Jackal, yep.
And, but I mean, it felt very much like well, here's a famous Spider-Man villain that hasn't been done before. Let's use him.
Well, but I mean, the guy does genetic research, right? I mean, Jackal was the guy behind the Spider Clone
And the clones.
saga. He
Yeah.
was the guy who my introduction was him with him was uh, an annual where Gwen Stacy shows up again, and Peter Parker sees her and he's like, "What is going on?" Well, it turns out that when the Jackal was doing his original clone stuff and he cloned Peter Parker, he also cloned Gwen Stacy,
Cloned Gwen.
and she was just out there just living life. And so I knew very little about Gwen Stacy, very little about the Jackal, and I get this annual and I was like, "This is weird."
It was weird.
But that was the Jackal,
That
and
was it.
then the Clone Saga shows up, and I'm like, "Oh." That's tying into that annual that I had. I wasn't like, I know the Jackal.
Right.
It was, oh, this ties into that annual that I had where it's a clone.
You know,
So,
when he finally went full Rhino, and I can't even remember the character's name.
yeah.
But when he finally went full Rhino, like, okay, this is a guy who can fight Kraven on his own terms and is better than Kraven in every way. You know, so now we get to how is Kraven going to become the king of the jungle over the rhino? Why does the lion the king of the jungle and not the rhino? Because the lion has a pack. And I thought that the fight was good enough.
The weak spot, the venting port or whatever that he has.
That was
yeah,
that was
he
God,
shoved that rebar way in there.
Yeah,
Whatever
he
that
did.
was. That
well, these guys get Wolverine level regeneration, but
and then the whole he's just gonna get trampled.
Yeah.
And now I was surprised though because the one were these wildebeest? What were these?
Wildebeest.
This
Yeah.
is okay. The one with the one horn.
Yeah.
I thought it was dead. I really did because they had been hunting them for 16 years. Like,
I don't think these were supposed to be specific wildebeests, were they?
Well, the one that was leading the herd.
Yeah,
this
yeah.
time,
I saw you had a broken horn.
Well, he had already met that guy 16 years ago. KRAVEN,
the origin story.
During the origin part, when he goes to his mom's reserve,
yeah,
in Russia, and the herd comes running at him, the one that stops has only one horn.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and then later on, that's the whole, like, when he first kills people, because he comes and finds that they've slaughtered the herd and only taken the horns, which I didn't know if that was a thing for wildebeest horns, but I do know elephant tusks and rhino horns, but yeah, so I assumed that was dead because that was 16 years ago, and here they're still doing it 16 years later, or whatever, and so now but then that was leading the pack when he gets them to. I like the way it was circling around them and formed a barrier for their fight.
Right.
That was kind of cool. And then how he used that barrier to pull the rhino in. He gets trampled and gets killed.
I thought they did some good things. I noticed when the film did try to bring out a theme, it was really kind of heavy-handed. I mean, Russell Crowe has the line a couple of times, embrace who you are, and then you will have the power to be who you're meant to be. Like, okay, got it. Everybody get that? Everybody get that? Okay, got it. Oh, we get it 3 times in the film? Got it. Embrace who you are.
Yeah.
Good. And his brother said something. He's like, why can't we choose who we are?
Well,
which I thought that was interesting, both, thinking he's going to become the chameleon, so that he gets to choose whoever he is. But, I mean, turned right back on to KRAVEN, because KRAVEN doesn't get to choose who he is. His identity was defined first by his father, and then by
By his power.
then
Yeah.
by his power.
Yeah,
And
I hadn't thought about it in terms of Craven, but definitely in terms of
oh
Dimitri, where
yeah, yeah,
he's like, why
it's
can't we choose who we
pretty
are?
on the nose, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
tried. They tried. Made an
So
effort. Good job, team. Everybody get that?
well, and that's the thing I would say about this movie is it's crafted well.
It is.
Like you can see that there's people who took time to craft things together to try and I'm not sure how many writers there were on this movie. I think if I remember correctly, there was at least three people, uh, two on the screenplay and a third who was helped with story by or
Mhm.
something. I can't remember exactly, but this was something where they worked together. The director probably came in, dropped his footprint on it as well, and said,
Sure.
"Okay, I want to. What if we do this? What if we draw this in and draw that out?" And um, but all things considered, they made a movie that said something.
Mhm.
They made a movie that mostly made sense.
Mhm.
Um, and they made a movie that had some exciting action sequences. Now, the violence, that's I would still say that the violent stuff that happened in this movie, especially when he's taking down the people at the end in the forest, where he's using like the bear trap on their head and stuff like that. Like there's some rough stuff going on here where you have your hero doing some pretty awful
Pretty stuff.
stuff to
Yeah.
people.
And
And
that sequence in specific, when they started doing that, I'm like, oh, I wonder if they're going to recreate First Blood, and they did. They recreated
pretty much, pretty much, he had
several
the traps
scenes
ready
from
to
First
go.
Blood. A nod to Stallone, of course. The writing team was also the guys who did the Expendables. Um,
Okay.
but
But here's the
there were
thing.
so many '80s and '90s action movie homages in this.
Other than, I mean, in First Blood, he did all of those traps.
Yeah.
You know, or Predator, where he
A
did all
Predator,
those
yeah,
traps
a
in
lot of
one
the same
night.
stuff in Predator. Sure.
I at least believe that these traps were probably already there.
Yeah.
Because this is his domain. This is his home. They
Right.
are invading his place, and they have no place there. The one really cheesy part was they're looking at the weapons, and she's like, "Ah, I know how to use this. I
Yeah.
did archery in summer camp." And
Yeah.
then she kills the guy, and he's like, "Oh wow, that must have been some summer camp or
I
something
have
like that."
secrets too, you know.
Well, and that's like, well, we're never gonna know them,
Okay.
are we? Because sequel.
Sure
But
you do. Secrets. Good on you.
yeah, yeah. I really
Well.
did think that Chameleon was going to become Chameleon because they would have to use the serum on him.
Mhm.
That he was going to die or almost die, and they're going to use the leftover serum on him. But no,
I was expecting
Craven just gets a second
Calypso
dose.
to take it.
What's that?
I was expecting Calypso to
Oh,
take the remaining serum. It's her legacy after all.
yeah. And why not? I mean,
You
it's
know,
there.
make it
You've
make
seen what it
them.
does.
Yeah, who knows?
Unless maybe you can only do it when you're dead.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if
Okay.
I want to risk it.
Well,
You know?
that's thematically that is very much in keeping with the movie, isn't it? Because the power in that serum, if you're dead, you can't volunteer to take that. You have to be chosen to have this power.
Yeah.
And thematically that's very much in keeping with the film. So I appreciate that.
Well, and it was destiny. That was the whole the
Destiny.
cards, the tarot cards. They read them, and it's you're going to do
Oh
this
my
very
God.
soon. Here, take this.
I almost checked out when the tarot cards come out. I'm like, okay, tarot cards are European. They're in Africa, but
Doing
grandma's Jamaican?
voodoo, yeah.
Well, voodoo is worldwide, but grandma was Jamaican. I mean, it was weird.
Well, it
It was weird.
it's there because Calypso.
No.
I think, and then the whole she leaves the card with him, and she left it in his hands, but they found it in
In
his
his
pocket.
pocket.
So at some
Sure.
point while he was dying, he's like, "Oh, I don't know what this is, but I'm just gonna put it in my
Yeah, put it in my
pocket."
pocket.
Yeah.
Now, on the other
So
hand, I really liked the sequence when he gets drugged. Oh, we didn't talk about the foreigner. That was weird.
yeah, yeah, another Marvel
Another
villain.
random villain
Yeah.
check off. But I mean, he comes out and all the spiders start coming down.
So
That
that's your
was,
Spider-Man reference.
I thought that, but yeah, but it was so good. And they flash
But here,
back to his mom, spiders everywhere. I
but
wish
what's
they'd led
cool
into
about
that.
that, yeah, yeah. But what's cool about that is that was something that if they did do the Sinister Six and they did have some sort of conflict with Spider-Man,
Yeah.
that is there's some character moments there where he's going to be overcoming fear or whatever it might be, or maybe even saying, "I'm going after him
Mhm.
because this is my greatest fear, and he is more than human,
Mhm.
and he is a prey worthy." I mean, I could see them doing something like that with
With it.
Spider-Man if they were going to do some sort of hunt with Tom Holland or something.
Right.
So
Now, when Russell Crowe picks them up in the beginning, he says, "Your mother's dead. She was weak. She killed herself." And you remember in the beginning of Craven's Last Hunt, they said my mother was insane. She was weak. She killed herself. And they keep coming. It's a through line throughout that entire storyline, and it even ends with Craven laying down in the coffin. They said my mother was insane, and before he eats his own gun. And then, of course, his son comes back to be the Craven the Second. And when they did that, I half had an expectation that the that Sergei wasn't going to make it to the sequel. That Craven in the sequel would have been Dmitri, which could have been, oof. But
yeah.
oh well.
Yeah, I at the beginning when they were doing the origin story and I was still sorting out who was who, I wondered if the older, stronger brother was going to end up being killed
Mhm.
and the younger one was going to be the one who would become Craven later on. I wonder if they're going to do a little switcheroo like that. And
Yeah.
they didn't.
So many
But
might have been.
yeah. Yeah.
So many might have been.
All right. Well, let's make sure we've covered everything you want to cover because we're going to need to close this down pretty soon
Gosh, yeah,
here.
I know. I'm eating up
So,
all your time. The things that impressed me the most were the cinematography, especially in the early part of the film. I was just so super impressed with the way they did all that. I loved the way they leaned into the mythic aspects of Craven as part of that world. I loved that. I mean, and everything else kind of wrapped up in a satisfying way without a whole lot of surprises. So yeah, I don't have any complaints about this film.
I I do, but not enough to care. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't enough for me to say I could see myself watching this movie again.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I ever will, but this is not like Madam Web or Morbius even where I'm just like, I don't Madam Web I'll never watch again. Morbius I don't need to watch again. This one I don't need to, but if it showed up for free somewhere on one of the streaming services that I'm already, subscribed to,
Mm-hmm.
I could see revisiting it. The thing that does kind of, like I said, shoot yourself in the foot kind of a thing is whenever they do have like the grand closing of a universe,
Mm,
there is just this kind of vibe of, well, it's done.
yeah.
And it's not even cohesive enough to care that it was a universe. Venom trilogy, it's a trilogy by itself, and this other
Sure.
stuff they were doing around it didn't really matter. And the tie-ins to the bigger, broader MCU never mattered. Uh, Michael Keaton showing up in Morbius, that doesn't
Doesn't
matter.
matter at all.
If we're gonna see him again, it's because they did something off screen probably to bring him back, where he's like, "Well, that was weird. You know what happened to me? I'll tell you about it later. But I'm back now.
Right. Here I am. Let's go get Spider-Man.
Yeah, yeah." And so, um, but that's what actually is a strength for Craven. It's its own thing.
Yeah.
And it's a standalone movie
It
that has a
is.
beginning, a middle, and an end. And it was setting up some possible stuff, but not in such a way where you're like, massive cliffhanger, and it didn't feel like you got a satisfying ending to the story.
Yeah.
And so that's, worked for me.
I
Worked
mean,
for me. I'm still
I
at
loved
3
it.
though.
Still in
at
3? That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
So. All right. So, Winston, people have seen your website underneath your name this whole time. But let's tell people where people can find you and the things that you do and have
goodness.
done. Quickly, because there's like 50 websites and
Sure.
all that. Yeah. Not
No,
really. I'm
the
exaggerating.
central hub there is readwriterelease.com. Read good
You saw on
books,
the screen.
write more books, release them into the wild, and then that links to everything else that I've got going on. That's the book talk, YouTube and Facebook stuff, the Starman Saga books, Diane Detzer's books, and then whatever other random book reviews and things. And it's fairly focused on books. Everything comes off of that. Oh, and the podcast, the Science Fiction Theater podcast. Everything has come off of that one hub, readwriterelease.com. If you're, it's fairly sci-fi specific at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a variety of other stuff. So if you like good books, hopefully you'll find something interesting.
All right, perfect. Winston, thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll find something else we can do another time.
Oh yeah, there's a couple more dead universes we can talk about. Absolutely.
The unfortunate thing is technically not a dead universe because it's a part of that multiverse.
All right.
So, all right. Well, everyone else, thank you so much for listening. Check us out at strangersandaliens.com or youtube.com/strangersandaliens. If you're listening to the audio podcast, check us out on YouTube. If you're listening to or watching the video, you can find a lot more episodes over at strangersandaliens.com where we talk about movies like this and talk about books and talk about all sorts of things. So, and also you can find me at benavery.com. That's where you can find my book, Ghosts of the Future, and the book that I edited, A Time for Everything. And until next time, thank you so much for spending time with us. And if you're part of a dead universe or not, I want to wish you Godspeed.